Welcome back, everyone, to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy and Mike. We're excited to have you all here. I've got some great topics, I think, again today. And our main topic today, we even debated a bit on the title here. Tommy and I were kind of going back and forth here. We're going to talk about a deep dive on continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD, branching strategies. I know, riveting. People are going to be like clamoring. We've gotten so many questions around what is a branching strategy and how does this fit my organization? So that's what we're going to unpack today. I will admit, when Tommy and I were kind of more working on this initially, I didn't really realize or understand there was different strategies or different branching patterns you could use with CI/CD. And now that I know a little bit more, I'm like, okay, I can now recognize these patterns that people are talking about, and I can put a name to them, which is great. So it's adding knowledge here.
Mike, you'll know when you have some real fun. I'm not even kidding. This morning, and I really should stop doing this to my wife and let her have her coffee before I start getting into this. But
oh boy, anytime you talk to your wife before coffee, it's a recipe for disaster, Tom. I'm telling you now.
Like, look, and I'm telling her, like, I was just telling her about the age of fabric and how it's 5 careers. I'm like, this other idea about Git. Can you humor me? And she said, fine. But it's like, so I'm like, all right. It's hard to explain, but it takes skill to explain it to someone who is not a developer, much less tries to understand it. I think I did a pretty good job. It's like, okay, you know, your Word, you have a Microsoft Word file. Mm-hmm. Well, what if you want to make a change and you didn't want that to go immediately to save for everyone? Well, we have this idea called a commit. And I said, after coffee, we'll talk about branches. And she's like, I'm good.
We're done. I've understood it. It's tough to find like a real world analogy that works well inside the Git branching space, right? So, I mean, it's like I have lots of little things that I'm going to change, and not all of them are the same. And you know, some of them I'll change, but other ones I won't. And so, how do you? It's definitely a more advanced concept, but very much needed in what we're doing.
Oh, it's going to be huge today, and maybe she'll listen today because my wife did take dashboard in a day. Maybe.
Probably not. So my wife and my kids sometimes catch the podcast every so often, and what they'll do is they'll listen to the first, a little intro, because we'll talk, about life or whatever, and then probably about after like 30 seconds, they're like, "Yep, we've had enough. We're done. We're going to move on." They're talking too technical terms that we don't even know what they mean.
So, what did you think about keep all filters? Click
on to the next thing. Yeah. All right. Let's do a couple quick news items here. Tommy, you found our guest actually found a amazing article today. Santosh, which is the gentleman who's really working on top of the Fabric Spark experience, has announced something on LinkedIn. Tommy, what's this? What is this that we found?
Oh man, we got some more MCPs, Model Context Protocol. Again, this is another huge thing around the AI space, and for a lot of you, if you're still adverse, like, I don't know how much to dive in, go head first into the AI pool. Yeah. And what Santosh has been able to develop here is this idea. Again, these extend a lot of your AI tooling, most notably Claude, Anthropic's Claude's tooling, but also works with Cursor and VS Code as well. This idea around this Model Context Protocol, or MCP, is allows you to, in a sense, get extended knowledge around that AI. The AI has an additional knowledge it can pull from. Now, anyone can develop these, are open source. And the one that Santosh did is around Fabric. And this is the Fabrics Analytics MCP, which simply allows you to, again, allow Claude or those other tools to understand what's going on in your Fabric environment. So the kind of tagline here is chat with your Fabric's data and that engineering workload. And what this allows us to do, Mike, and again, this is just, I love this stuff so much. What this simply allows us to do, and again, it's using APIs in the background, but for you, I can be in my AI tool of choice and simply say, you know what, hey, what's going on right now? Or let's create a notebook. I need to create a notebook, or I want to view a notebook that I already have. Well, it's not going to pull up Fabric. It's all going to happen through the interface you're in. So what's neat about this, the possibilities, Mike, here is I can be in Claude, just in a normal chat bot, so to speak, that agent working through that. I could even be in VS Code in a Git environment that I already have, and let's create something in real time, and that should show up in your environment. So there's a lot of opportunities here, Mike.
This is going to change. This is, again, I see the game very quickly changing under my feet here, very, very fast. And so a couple links. I put some links in the chat here. One link is for the blog article on LinkedIn from Santosh. So awesome. Thank you, Santosh, for the details on that one. If you want more details, you need to follow the second link here, which is actually the code he presents from GitHub, which is code he published to his private repo. So it's under Santosh's name. But then you'll also notice here key features. And I just want to read through some of these because I think these are important. Complete CRUD. Create, read, update, delete for all Fabric items, or for Fabric items, just not all Fabric items.
Be wary. Be careful.
Livy API integration, so full Spark session and batch job management using the MCP. Spark application monitoring, so real-time monitoring across all workspaces and items. Awesome. Claude Desktop ready. A plug-and-play integration with Claude Desktop. Enterprise authentication, which is, again, one of the things that we're always concerned about. How do we get into this, the APIs and talk to them? You can use Bearer, Service Principal, Device Code, and Interactive. MSAL integration, Microsoft Identity Authentication Library for secure enterprise access. So that's also integrated. Analytics and insights generate comprehensive monitoring dashboards, comprehensive testing, write extensive tests with real API validations, and then token management. Automatic token validation and expiration handling. There's a lot of features on this one.
Yeah.
And when I read this article, he says, what did he say? I'm thrilled to share this model context protocol. Had started it as a weekend project with GitHub Copilot.
So it was vibe coding.
Vibe coded. So
yeah.
I'm impressed. And I think with vibe coding, we're going to see a lot more of these kind of projects, side projects, just turn into like part of the actual product or something that you can go get and use with the actual product. This is cool. Anyways, I've got to figure this out. There's a whole lot of things here. Documentation is extremely long, which is probably written by AI. That's why it's so robust and it's there, which is great. That's what I want to see. So I'm going to have to go unpack this a bit and see how this works. I got to be honest, Tony, I've only played with MCP slightly. I haven't really gotten into it yet. So I feel like I'm missing out on things here slightly.
So here's one of the things that I'm really impressed with Copilot doing this. And honestly, for people listening, initially when Fabric came out, the API was tedious. It was very C# focused. They didn't have a lot of Python. And if you wanted to build an app, really, if you wanted to connect or talk to Fabric in an API, you needed to build a C# application. It was really strange. But what you mentioned here, and this is, I know it sounds weird to say the highlight here, but you talked about open authentication, which simply means that your browser can open and you can log in that way. Or you can use the service principal. So the fact that we're making headways here cannot be understated on just how far we're getting with not just Fabric, but also these MCPs. Again, if you've not heard of the Model Context Protocol or still weary, this is the time to look into it, because I bet you too, you can see something for your own application. Mike, when's the day there's going to be the Power BI.tips Model Context Protocol? I don't know what
after my weekend, after my weekend project, it'll happen, right? You know,
I don't know what it's gonna do, but it's gonna laugh at you.
Apparently, I just need to call Santosh and say, "Hey, we need a weekend here. Let's go hang out and build an MCP for Power BI tips." Right? So, I don't know. Again, this is one of the things I'm not quite sure I exactly understand how all this stuff is working. One of the things that kind of baffles me a little bit here. So, in this whole MCP language, the idea is like you're sending a prompt to an AI. And then the AI has context awareness of like an API layer behind the scenes. That's kind of what I'm understanding it being. But my understanding is the MCP is a piece of hardware, a machine or something that needs to run, and it needs to run on some device. So we're kind of involving multiple computers, right? We're talking about Claude. Claude does not run on my local machine. Claude runs as an API call to the service. That's what you're sending a prompt to it. It's coming back with some information. The MCP is something that runs on like my local machine. And so we're basically giving control through the MCP to Claude and say, look, I'm going to talk to Claude. Claude, you need to talk to the MCP. MCP, you take what the Claude thing has done, translate it into API calls, and then go ahead and make the appropriate API calls to the back end, and then do what you got to do. So to me, the front end observer, I'm just talking to it in natural language, English, but it's kind of getting translated a couple times to actually do things that I want. And then I can see, I think the other thing here too is the artifact. Like if I said, create a new lake house with this name, with these properties and some sample data in it or whatever, right? The MCP would be able to say, okay, the Claude would say, okay, I understand what you said. Here's how I translate it into language or API calls that the Fabric would use, and then it makes the API calls, and then on the website I would see, oh look, the lake house appears, right? So then I would say, oh, it did it. It made the action. So I think it's my mental model how I'm thinking about this. Is that right, Tommy?
Yeah. Let me give some examples that I use.
Yeah, give me some examples.
And I think this will probably help understand what the MCP, really what the potential is. So and these can use in really an IDE like VS Code or Cursor, same ones. So I have one, for example, called the Windows CLI. That's an MCP that on behalf of me can run command line interface operations. So that's a Windows-based one, or obviously you could do one for Mac. I have one also called sequential thinking. That actually changes the agent's ability and how it actually processes your request or command. So you can combine them too. I have one called also the Taskmaster that actually makes whatever I need to do into different tasks. It creates the task first. So let's take that example. I can say, hey, Taskmaster, and I actually would write that. Let's create a notebook that's going to achieve X, Y, and Z. You'll actually see it perform utilizing both of those MCPs to create the task before it does anything. So one, it can actually apply to a different API or tool, or it's going to change how that, in a sense, agent operates, how it actually thinks or reasons. So it has a full extendability both on your machine, or it can be on a server like Notion or Fabric or Gemini. Google's API can connect to that. I have one for deep research. So that one actually uses Perplexity. It's like, hey, before you do anything, research this kind of application that I'm trying to do. See if there's any examples out there. Then Taskmaster, I want you to create the task for it. And I can have that all apply. So it almost creates another, in a sense, tooling. So it's really, really neat.
Awesome. Okay, we gotta cut the AI conversation there, because every time I talk AI, it's like we talk about half the time in just AI, and we won't ever get to the actual topic here. So let's cut it there. Let's get into our main topic today. Our main topic today will be around. Sorry, I'm pulling my notes here again. Deep diving on a continuous integration, continuous deployment, branching strategies. There we go. Everyone's waiting with bated breath at this point.
Gosh. Can't wait.
All right. Oh, we've got our.
Call. Apparently
we got a caller. All right, well, we're bringing. Welcome to. We're not good at this caller thing. We haven't done this enough to really make this a smooth transition, but that's the best we got for now. So that's what you get for a free podcast. That's. All right. Welcome back, Matthias. We're happy to have you back on as a caller for our show. We appreciate you.
Hello. How are you? Excited to be back
doing
here.
Well, we have gotten, and again, I'll say this publicly, we've gotten the most amount of positive feedback for these last couple episodes around DevOps, Data Ops, and CI/CD. We are very pleased that you are here with us, and we think that your wealth of knowledge is really helping out. People are engaging with it. I think we've struck a chord here to some degree, is people want to learn more about this. They're being told they need to be using this, and no one really has like real information on this. Like there's no one actually discussing this real topic and unpacking what does this mean for you, like daily. Like what can I do right now with this whole DevOps experience? All right, let's jump in here. Let's Tommy, maybe you want to frame out a little bit. Okay, we're talking about continuous integration, continuous deployment. Maybe we just quickly touch on that and then talk about the thing what we're going to actually talk about, which is a branching strategy. And let's start it there.
And to pull into context too, we've been lucky to have Matthias on for the last 3 episodes, and kind of concluding today, just talking about this idea around data ops, DevOps, source control, and how does that mix with your development now in using Fabric and Power BI? For a lot of you, maybe you're finally converted to that new process. Maybe you just didn't have the knowledge on where do you start. And hopefully we've been able to do a good job of talking about the why, the what around here, and the value that this really can entail. And we're kind of jumping ship here, or really ending with a bang, having this conversation, which I imagine we'll have it again. Talking about really a little more of the technical side around not just the team process, but now kind of shifting towards the technical process. So using all these tooling, using all these development ideas. There's this idea too. Mike and I have mentioned this before. It's not always the best idea to do everything in your main branch. Well, some of you have laughed. Some of you gone, branch?
Whatever, Tommy.
Trees? Yeah.
I only do code development and I don't make mistakes.
Well,
I just everything in main.
Right, and some people
everything in main.
We're talking about trees, and they're like, "What? I don't know why branches are here." So today we're uncovering and we're going to unpack this idea of the technical process, specifically around that CI/CD and specifically around branches, and how does that work from kind of the global universal best practices? Is there a different process around Power BI and Fabric?
Okay,
you like
Tommy,
you caught one, by the way.
It hit me like 5 minutes later. He's like, we're not talking about trees. I'm like, what's he talking about trees? I'm talking about main branching. Like,
I knew it hit you because you went on mute.
I went on mute. I got quiet. Then you saw my smile go from like straight line to like, oh, he got it. It just took him a second. Yeah. Yes, Tommy. If Mike makes a commit on main, does anyone hear it in the forest? No one does until my developers tell me, slap me on the wrist. You can't commit to main. You're not allowed to work in production. Oh boy.
So Matthias, with that being said, what the heck's a branch and why should I care?
It's not a tree. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Right. Good question. Actually, when I was listening to you earlier, I felt a good challenge there because you said you were trying to explain to your wife the whole Git thing.
Yes.
And you failed to come up with a good analogy for branching. I think I came up with one.
Ooh, I love it.
So,
all right, let's hear it.
Okay. So let's imagine you're a painter, right? And you're working on a massive painting, where you constantly sort of continue to make changes and add stuff. So if you're on your own and you work on the actual main painting, let's say, think Michelangelo, right? Sixtine Chapel.
Oh, the basilica, right?
If you're on your own, you're working directly on the final piece, right? Every time you're adding something, some new strokes, it's basically a commit, right? But you're working directly on main. You're working directly on.
I like this.
This is good.
On the end product here. Now, if you want to collaborate, let's say you have a team of painters. You don't quite like having someone right next to you, right? So you come up with some rules and you basically say everyone has to work in a separate room where they don't necessarily see
so good
what else is going on. And the rule is that somehow they get to take a complete clone of the current state of the painting into the room. Then they can do whatever they want to do to it, and at some point I need to take it and walk back into the main hallway and basically say I want to apply or I want to replicate everything I've just done to my own copy to the main one, the one that hangs in the hallway for everyone to see, right? And so those rooms are branches,
I like it.
You can easily imagine. I mean, I think that the analogy goes quite far, right? Because what if, let's say, you had a building in the bottom right corner, and then two painters at the same time decided to repaint the roof, right?
Yeah,
they're gonna have some difficulties when they come back to the main hall and
conflict merge.
I want my roof to actually be the one that everyone else sees. So this is how we then have conflicts and how we need to figure out how to resolve them. So
Tommy, I've already done this with Tommy. Tommy's got he starts using oil paints. I'm over here using water based. Right?
I'm more a pastel guy myself.
So like that won't work. So like Tommy can go in his room and oil paint all day long. I'm using water based paints. These will not mix. Like we cannot put these two together. So someone's got to make the decision to say we all need to use the right kind of paint together. Maybe you're using latex paint. I don't know. eggshell, whatever the type of paint's there.
Well,
glossy finish. Tommy, we're not using glossy finish. We're going to be using eggshell,
little matte guy,
pastel colors.
But I think you're so Matthias, you're hitting on, I think, some of the crucial aspects on why should anyone care about branching. And what I'm hearing are really the crucial aspects here is we're talking about conflict. We're talking about being able to develop with other people in a sense from a collaborative point of view. And you're talking about resolution. And to me, those are the three things that make Git and make source control or CI/CD what it is.
Yeah,
I like it.
And so when it now comes to branching strategy, it's all about how many of those parallel rooms do I have, right? How long is someone allowed to stay in there to do their own stuff in isolation? How soon and how often do they come out to coordinate and to compare and to figure out who wins? So it's stuff like that. Do I have in front of my main presentation hallway, where the public picture is, do I have a staging area where all teams changes are somehow collated before I then go into the public space? So it's stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think the important thing for people listening and just to understand that every repository, anything you do, if you create it in GitHub, you create it in Fabric, has a central or main master branch, which is the public facing one. This is the people walking across that building going, oh, I see what they're painting. There's always going to be a public or really, in a sense, default branch. That the problem with a lot of us dumb people out there, what we don't understand is we build and branch, and you're basically painting on top of the wall that everyone can see. But what we're talking about today and what we're really introducing today is, well, no. We don't paint the wall that everyone can see. Let's go in the back, go in your room, and those are the other branches that we started. So let's dive into this. And Mike, I want to propose to you your not journey into this, but when you got introduced to this idea around branching or CI/CD, was it in Fabric? Where was that first introduction? Because I think a lot of people, when they look at this, they go, well, it couldn't be just Fabric, right? Has to be this other idea.
Let me, this is a great tee up, I think, here to what we're going to really talk about today is kind of what was my journey. How did I start doing this? So my company does a mix of app development and we do Power BI consulting. I started as a Power BI consultant and consulting as our business. That was our main source of income. We're now moving more of our work to app-based development on top of Power BI level things, which has been a lot of fun, interesting, challenging. But with that, we have to become, as your again, I'm going through the struggle that Matthias, you've described in your prior work environments, right? I started with a small team. It was like me and another guy, and we started growing the team. More people came on board, and now we're having to say, okay, we now have multiple people. We have multiple painters trying to create these basilicas of art and amazing applications that we're building. The creme de la creme of great apps, right? So as we're building these things, we now have to figure out how to work together. And so, who's building on what bit of code? How can I have someone work on a project for like a week or two and then pull them off and move to another project? So they have to be able to jump in, learn what's going on in the project, understand the code base well enough. And then also people we have lots of branches on lots of different projects all at the same time. We're a small team. Everyone needs to kind of put a hand in and help write code. So I understood this idea of main being attached to your app, right? So that made sense to me. Main is the app. That's the thing that's in production. That's kind of what we started with. Outside of that, I didn't really have a whole lot of other things. I started getting into Azure Static Web Apps. And with that, you could build branches, and then every branch gets a build of the branch because that's just what Azure Static Web Apps do. So now we're talking branching strategies. And do we need to have a permanent dev branch that always has a dev application before we get to production? Well, you only get burned so many times having a branch that needs to move into main where you need to actually have integration testing across different developers. Again, when you're one developer, you probably don't need it to live around forever. You build it, it goes into dev. Great. You do your testing. It seems to work. Move it to production. But you've got 3 or 4 people now adding code to that dev thing, the integration tests. well, one person's work may have conflicted with another person's work, and I don't like how this is going together. So now we've got to like figure out how to pull it all together. So that was my experience, but I never learned there were actual terms. I never studied it. I just kind of started using it and from other experience from other people. And this is why I love, again, Matthias, I'm going to really toot your horn here. I love working with you because you've got this experience. You've got 20 years of development experience here. You've gone through these pain points already. I know I don't know everything. And so just having the conversations with you around, what should we be doing? What am I missing here that I'm not looking out for? And Matthias introduced me to GitFlow, GitHub Flow, GitLab's Flow, and trunk-based development. And they all, when you stand back and say, look, this is what CI/CD is, when you look at these different things, oh yeah, 100%, they make sense. And even Microsoft, which I wish they would do a little bit more language around this, they have a great page in their documentation that talks about CI/CD workflow options in Fabric, and I'll put that in the link. Awesome page of documentation. Nowhere do they call out any of these types of like standardized development-based workflows, and they're actually showing you like they have a GitHub Flow that they've documented. One of the options is Git-based deployments, right? Option number 2, Git-based deployments using build environments. Like they have all these patterns that you just see, but they don't actually call out like where they came from. And so I really want to just kind of like unpack more of that. And so in talking with you guys here and kind of unpacking this myself as I actually do app development, I now feel like I feel like the best way to go around this is kind of around the trunk-based development for my team. That seems to be like a thing that I want to use when I'm building things inside Fabric. So that's what I like. I enjoy that one. It seems to work very well for what we're building here. But again, you have to figure out for your team, one, you need to understand what's out there, and then you can kind of pick based on that pattern what makes sense to your team. And this is a maturity level too. If you're a less mature team, you're not going to want to pick one of these more complicated deployment strategies. You'll want to pick a more basic one. GitFlow might be what you want to start with, something very simple, and then move your way up to more complex things. And I think, again, Matthias, you'll probably weigh in this as well. I think these different strategies change depending on the size of your team as well.
Yeah. Apologies. I'm going to have to correct you on one thing here.
No apologies. Again, this is me. I'm not an expert in this. I'll fully admit that.
So GitFlow is arguably the most complicated Git workflow. That one has quite a history. It's going back to 2010 actually, and it's yes. So it's not really a good candidate for our time anymore, I would say. So there's a famous blog post. There's a famous blog post from 2010. It's still online from the guy who originally came up with it, and that one is heavily over-engineered. It has a number of permanent branches. You constantly have to merge between branches, and I'm glad the world has moved on and we've got something
better
more simple now. So whenever I think about the sort of the scale of different complexities around workflows, I would put GitFlow on the far end in terms of it's complicated. On the other end, I would say is trunk-based development, where you effectively we can argue about definitions here, but in a very strict sense, trunk-based development means you only have a main branch and everyone works on the main branch, which is also probably not what you meant when you just said it, Mike. But
yes and no,
because that is viable, but only if you have really, really good CI/CD in place, right? So if you have full automation, you can afford to commit directly into main, because your CI/CD pipeline will capture and
kick out multiple environments.
And we'll find any potential problems, right? Before deploying.
You're testing.
So the one thing which we need to be quite clear about is, and we've sort of implied that there's a direct link here, but there's a difference between Git branches and deployment environments. And I think it's really important not to mix those up, right? So you may well use a Git branching strategy where what happens to be in a given branch directly mirrors what's in an environment, but you don't have to, right? There are other ways of doing it.
I think again, I threw the article down for Microsoft's documentation on again. This I'm trying to also liken what they're describing. Again, their documentation that I just sent here in the chat is talking more about environments in concert with the branches, not just the branches. So again, it feels sometimes the lines get very blurry here around what So I like having everything I like having main attached to dev. I like that one. Everyone kind of builds their branches separately. We put everything back in main, and then from main, we then put it into dev, and then I use a deployment pipeline to kind of move things through the different environments. Not ideal in all situations because that doesn't sometimes address the data issues. But that's why we want to kind of unpack this.
But Mike, I think it's important what you just said here because there are kind of the forefather in Power BI to really having a CI/CD environment. For me, for example, we had a dev workspace and a production workspace way back in the day. And this was simply the idea of we don't want to push everything that we're working on right away so it's public facing.
Correct.
And before development pipelines, we had everything we worked in development. We would show stakeholders. Once they were happy with that, we would delete that, publish it to whatever production workspace kind of thing. And it worked. And it worked.
Yes.
But for a lot of people too, I think the best analogy or the kind of the closest thing that's in Power BI is the data pipeline or
deployment pipelines.
Deployment pipelines. There's too many pipelines. But and that simple idea where you had and they had test development or development test prod, which to me did not make sense for Power BI, just pure Power BI. But a lot of people could create the two workspaces. I had my development one for marketing, and I had my production one. And that straightforward way is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Matthias, is in its most purest sense or in its most simplest sense, this idea around what we're trying to do with branches.
Well, I was just going to come in on that because my own experience, whenever I kick off a new project, for instance, or whenever I, go to a client and look at, how can we help them, I always start thinking about environments in terms of, in addition to production, how many environments do we want to maintain? What makes sense in terms of stakeholder interaction, in terms of how many different work streams are in place at the same time, how many parallel development is going on. And once that's decided, once we know there's dev test prod, or once we know there's staging and prod, and then any number of dev environments, for instance, then from that, it follows which branching strategies we're using. Branching strategy is something that needs to align with the environments we're deploying into, and one follows the other. And so maybe that could be a takeaway for today. That's what I would strongly recommend. Think about it that way. Because again, right, at the end of the day, engineers have work because they're building something that goes into production and adds value. So I like to think backwards.
So let me lean into that if you don't mind. I really want to ask you. You said two things, or the two things you evaluate in terms of the structure or the methodology you're going to do at the end. What do you evaluate when you look at that? The number of people, the amount of data going through to choose that? Are you looking at the skill, the amount of people? What goes into that evaluation before you actually say this is going to be the Git methodology or the Git structure that we're going to use?
Good question. Well, there are 2 points really. One is what's my release cadence, and the second is
I like that.
Which guardrails do I have for something to become production, right? So let me break this down a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm working on something that's very, very, very agile, and I'm making small and very frequent changes, and the guardrails for those are extremely low. for this to go into production, right? Maybe I know it's a website, and a designer, makes some small incremental changes to it. There's no need for this to be officially reviewed. There's no need to stage this for someone else to have a look at it, right? It basically means you have a production environment, and maybe sort of a dev environment for your developers, but you don't need anything else, right? But let's say you've got a product that has sort of huge, I don't know, financial impact, and you need very thorough QA, and you need official stakeholder sign-off from outside your team, right? You definitely need a staging environment where those guys can actually review what you've done before they say it's okay to go into production, right? Now, most likely your developers are not going to push stuff straight into the staging environment. Most likely your developers are going to collate all their changes in a shared dev environment, right? So then we've got dev, staging, production. Now, what if you have something like Fabric, where we talked about this the other day, right? Where you can't clone Fabric as a system on your laptop.
Unfortunately,
you can, Fabric obviously only works in the cloud. So any developer, if they want to work on their own, make their own individual changes, they're going to need some sort of private environment, some sort of private workspace, or whatever you want to call it, for the changes they're working on whilst they're working on it, right? Every developer sort of needs a feature workspace at the minimum. So then we have feature workspace, private per developer. We've got dev workspace, where all those changes get combined, and someone can check whether they all work in conjunction. Then we've got a staging environment where the stakeholder reviews, and then we've got production, right? So it's I hope that makes sense. It all depends on what's the type of the project you're working with. How many parallel work streams do I have? How do I need to make this available to some external people for sign off?
I like this. I think you hit the nail on the head on a lot of pieces. I've worked in some teams that does, like, sometimes I'll be like, why on earth are we building 4 environments? Like, again, I'm coming from the world of like thin app development, small teams, like not a lot of, and so I've gotten involved in other projects where they're like, well, we have to have 4 environments. Like, we have to have a development environment for devs. Then we have a whole separate group of people that you describe the feature, and then you give it to a testing team, and they need a version of this so they can actually do QA testing, whatever you want there. Okay, now that we're done with that, now we go give it to the stakeholders. And so they need their own environment, because the testers can't be, then they've got to approve all the changes that the developers made beforehand. And then once the stakeholders get through, then you can move things to production. And I think this makes a lot of sense. Some companies can do dev prod. Some groups, depending on your size, could be just prod. Like, you can think of this in different ways. And I think defining out how many environments you need, what are the different functions, and what is your release cadence those are really solid points. Tommy, you asked a question around skill level here.
Yeah.
I'm going to gauge Matthias a little bit on this one. I'm going to give maybe my impression on this one. The skill level of people working in code and working with Git. I think this is in the BI space. My observation is not a lot of people know this stuff. Yeah. And so I feel like a lot of times we're starting kind of from scratch in a lot of spaces. And when I've worked with clients that are starting to get into this space, the Git integration for business intelligence, there's a lot of education that has to happen there. And it feels to me that it's very daunting for a lot of organizations. It's so complex. I don't understand it. But I think that's probably a failure on Microsoft or the community at teaching at large. Like, it shouldn't be rocket science. We need more. This is not scary. And going back to kind of our very first conversation is taking the time to slow down, to speed up on this. Let's learn what these things are. Let's really unpack the environments what we're going to do with our process, what is our release cadence. Because I think once you align on those high level goals, you can then set aside some time, to your point, Tommy, and physically educate and sit down. Here's what we're doing. And I think if you explain the goals and why you're doing these key milestones, look, we need 3 environments. Here's why. We're going to have a release every Friday or every Thursday, and then we're going to debug and fix things for Friday. Like if you define some of those key, let's call it like the what is it called? The OKRs, right? Here's some of our OKRs, right? An OKR for our team may be a release every week, 52 releases a year. Maybe that's something we're going to shoot for, right? And if you set that as a high level organizational goal, that then trickles down into how we do development. So every week, a feature's coming in or something new is happening, and we have that regular cadence. Or maybe it's every 2 weeks we're trying to get something out into production. And that way, one of the things I have found is when I hand the code over to the testers and or QA team or the stakeholders, sometimes they doodle around and they don't approve it. So like we're sitting on a chain, like, the developers keep moving forward. We've got 3 or 4 changes potentially coming down the pipeline, and we're still waiting for testers to approve something that's 2 weeks old. That can't happen. So what is in your process to, work with that team to get them to get the testing done and say, do you approve it? Can we move it forward? Or do we still have issues? We need to go back and fix things. So I'll just pause there. Thoughts?
Well, it's fair what you said. And I normally don't defend Microsoft, but unfortunately here, I'm going to have to push back and disagree a little with you saying that this is a failure on Microsoft's side where we haven't gotten this. And again, as much as I'm wearing the Microsoft shirt, I have known to throw some shade. But that being said, I think to me, we're not at a point yet where like if the failure to do Git is like the failure to build a semantic model with facts and dimensions, right? So if you went to a client or someone on your team was building a semantic model and they had like a table for January, February, March, you would look at them with horror or anger, go, how could you do this? Right. But we're not near a point yet where this is a universally accepted thing. All 5 people listening here, great. You may take this to your team, but by no means is this part of the universal workflow of Fabric or Power BI. Should it be is a different question. Is it? Or is it like, hey, you have to do this best practices we do, even at the basic scale, the GitHub, a main and feature branch. This is for still, it is very niche. To me, I think it's very niche. The reason I say this too is because I have a few clients right now where we're looking to push Fabric, and I'm like, we're teaching them semantic models. I see right now, unfortunately, the way I see it, I see teaching them Git and source control is low on the list of all the things I need to teach them and all the things that they need to implement. And again, I'm happy to hear the disagreement here, but if I need to teach them semantic modeling, I need to teach them report development. I think that to me just it adds more confusion. To me, if I'm looking at the skill level of I'm learning, you have to start with the basics, no? And to me, this is not a basic yet.
I think, from my point of view, it's complicated and challenging because of the first thing you said, Mike.
Right.
There are so many different ways to use Git today.
Correct.
Git as a tool, Git as such, is just a really, really low level thing. But
Right.
you can do all sorts of stuff with it, right? It's like a toolbox. You can build a tiny little toy. You can build a mega city.
And not a lot of guardrails.
So
yeah.
There are choices and to be made, around branching. Let's just stay there, right? And how you actually collaborate. How do you make those decisions? How do you even know what's available, right? So I think this is a challenge. We're not talking about a skill that's like, I don't know, how do I build a performant measure in a semantic model, right? I mean, that's probably something which you can teach relatively easily because there are sort of finite and well-known aspects to it. And actually deciding how you're collaborating as a team and how you use tools like Git and other things for it, we're not at a point where we can just take any textbook and sort of just follow the guidance there, right? There's a lot that goes into it. Well, I mean, there are at least two main reasons, I think. One is it's a space that's constantly evolving. I mentioned GitFlow being 15 years old now. That used to be the hot thing. And back then, when it came out, it was a revelation. Nowadays, as I sort of tried to imply earlier, this is probably the last choice that people would go for. So things change. Tooling in a fabric space in particular, right? If you don't have tooling that supports your process choices really well, it's going to be a burden. It's going to be a churn, which is why I'm making a massive investment with Navigator to actually tackle exactly that, where we're actually looking, what are the big gaps, what are the big problems with DevOps today, and how can we address that with better tooling? So yeah, those would be my thoughts here. And why is it harder than it should be today?
So I want to unpack that tooling as an important step here as well, because I want to just kind of talk about, this is one of the areas that I think is not a disillusionment, but it is a how do I describe this one?
I'll hammer it, mid dude.
No. I think the tooling that we have today provided in Fabric, I mean, we have deployment pipelines, we have some simple things. The patterns that Microsoft explains in their CI/CD workflow options in Fabric, I believe option 1 they give you is a separate branch for every single environment. So there's a dev branch that's permanent. There's a test branch that's permanent. There's a prod branch that's permanent, and you're constantly merging between branches, or using some kind of DevOps thing to move code between different branches to make this work. My understanding, that's GitFlow. Like there's multiple permanent branches, and again, I could be wrong on that one. Is that GitFlow? Let me ask the question. Is that GitFlow? When there's multiple branches tied to separate environments, or am I just picking up something random?
Show me GitFlow. Yeah.
Behind door number 1.
Arguably not, I'd say. Sorry.
Okay. So where does so maybe I'm getting confused then between GitFlow and the other ones. So which one of these patterns, and this maybe we should talk about the patterns as well here as well. So let me finish my thought, and then let's talk about patterns, because maybe that would be good to clarify what these patterns are. Let's talk about each one of them and what they mean. There is a good article that I have attached to the description of this video that should have at least a description and a graphic, an infographic of the different patterns you could potentially be using. So tooling today, what I see out in the community is a collection of Python, potentially notebooks, and PowerShell. That's the tooling that I see today. Have you guys seen anything different as respect to tooling around CI/CD stuff?
VS Code extensions. And Mike, this is such a good point, because the tooling that's available right now, if you were just to say, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to research, I'm just going to use what's in Fabric, you have nothing. You have a process to push Git around or code around. But once you go to the Fabric interface, it goes, oh, do you want to overwrite everything? You go, sure. Or you can go to GitHub and see
very simplified.
Very simplified. It's not meant for you to actually really review it. If you want a prayer of having a chance of managing those different branches, you need VS Code and you need an extension, right? There is no good interface to manage any of this. So I completely agree with you. Regardless if you're doing, honestly, regardless if you're doing everything in main or if you're pushing anything through the different branching strategies, there is no by default tooling that's even close to helping you manage this, to me at least. And I would love to hear if there's something different.
Your thoughts, Matthias, on that one? What's your lens on the tooling?
Yeah, when I mentioned tooling earlier, I wasn't even thinking about CI/CD. I was thinking about tooling in terms of helping team members follow the process. Around actually start creating a branch in order to begin work on a new feature, then creating PRs, as in integrating the feature work back into some sort of so a shared environment or branch, right? So things like that. Again, you mentioned Fabric tooling, right? If you use Git integration, which obviously is natively built into Fabric, one of the big things that's bugging me, just to give one example, you made changes, but everything you're going to get in terms of feedback is this item has had changes. You can't, there's no diff, you can't go any further. You're not going to, only after you've actually committed it and pushed it back to your dev server, you won't see what's changed. And that's a massive anti-pattern when it comes to source control and DevOps. A good Git commit practices are all about making meaningful, small, granular commits, give them good commit messages, and keep the changes that are contained in that commit sort of as a unit of work. If you can't even tell what the change is, leaving aside the fact that you could accidentally commit something that you never meant to change to begin with, things have broken down quite badly, right?
Matthias, the way you're talking about this tells me how much you've been burned by this in the past. You can hear the memory, the post-traumatic
the pain.
memory.
You speak from a point of pain, learning. So this is why I like talking to Matthias, because there's so much wisdom and knowledge that you've already gone through here. So let me talk. Is a GitHub? So let's say GitHub. Checking code in out of GitHub. Would you consider that a tool? Is that part of the tool that you're describing, or is there a separate tool that GitHub is a part of that tool, but it's not the end solution that you're looking for? Maybe I'm missing, or I'm just trying to unpack what you're saying about the tooling specifically, Matthias.
So I want tooling to help me with every aspect of managing my project, right? And so to me, that begins with what I explained earlier. At the beginning of a project, I think about and I plan which environments am I going to have. What are they called? Who's got access to them? Are they permanent? Are they temporary? Then I decide which branching strategy goes with that. What are my branches called? In an ideal world, you would put a branching policy in place, which ensures that your CI server actually rejects pushes to certain branches when you're not meant to push to them, right? So this is the kind of tooling I'm talking about. If as a team you agree that no one's allowed to push into main and that everyone has to merge changes into main using pull requests, in an ideal world, you want tooling to actually enforce that not only are they not allowed, they're physically not able to, right? So it's that kind of stuff. Second thing, if we say, and obviously that's definitely best practice, for each a new piece of work, we're creating a feature branch, and we want to keep this feature branch as short-lived as possible. So the individual developer now has the task of naming that branch something. So from my point of view, following a good naming convention is part of the tooling. Most importantly, also making sure that you clean up after yourself. Once you're done working on a particular feature and it's been merged, you want to make sure that this branch gets removed everywhere. Again, this is also something which, without good tooling, you're going to end up accruing lots of mess in your system. So it's stuff like that, really. Basically, the definition of stuff, the setup in terms of policies, the setup around CI/CD, but then the day-to-day guidance around, I'm a developer, I'm trying to do this thing, help me create this branch, help me make this commit, help me create a pull request, etc., right?
Okay, good. I'm glad you're going down that route, because and the reason I'm bringing this point up kind of as well here is, inside the Power, there's a couple of different UIs you can use to kind of start creating some of these experiences. For example, like if I'm in the Fabric workspace or a premium workspace, let's call it premium workspace because premium per user also gets this as well. It's not just a Fabric thing. So any premium workspace, you can connect that workspace to a branch that is inside of GitHub or Azure DevOps. Those are two parts of the tooling pieces. Now, in the Fabric UI, you can click on Create New Workspace from Branch. What it does is a very simple action of create the branch, create a new workspace in Fabric, and then tries to deploy everything into that workspace for you. There's no ordering. It'll just deploy things as it thinks it needs to deploy them. There's no, I can't control it basically. There's little to no control as a developer. But to your point though, Matthias, there's this idea of, there's a whole bunch of interlocked pieces inside a single workspace. The notebook's attached to a single lakehouse. The data that's in the lakehouse is different potentially than what's in your branch. You may need a different data or have to do a process where you need to load in some data to work on that branch while you're doing the development. So a lot of these other kind of like, I could maybe call them checkboxes, don't exist that I need to automate all of that. So while that works well, you can do that one option, right? The second option is you can go into Azure DevOps, you could go into GitHub, and you can make a branch there. You could say, click a button, make a new branch, put your little name in, boom, done. You can do it from a CLI, you can do it in VS Code. Like there's all these other kind of really other cool experiences you can do this with. But then that's not automatically linked back to like, where's the workspace? Did I deploy the things yet? So yes, I have a branch, but there's no reflection into, again, Matthias, back to your point, it's a cloud system. If I'm going to work on it, I can't work on everything all in Fabric, all in my local machine. I can't virtualize the whole Fabric environment. I have to go use some of it that's inside the service. So where does that part live? So I think this is what I'm maybe trying to articulate here with the tool conversation is there's little pieces of here that are missing that is causing me as a development or the team of developers, there's friction here. Really? And so what's being used to solve that problem is Microsoft. Again, great job, Microsoft. You're doing a good job getting better at this. This is way ahead of where we were like just using Power BI. So it's gotten a lot better. I'll admit that. But what we're getting from the Microsoft team or other people in the community, we're getting a whole bunch of PowerShell scripts. We're getting a whole bunch of like Python things, and it's all mushed together. Like I don't really want to manage all that. Like I don't want it to be a whole combination of like automation through all these different languages. I want just the one tool to do it. Like let me go to GitHub. Let me say create a branch, and in that create a branch action, it should do everything. It should make the workspace. It should copy these artifacts over. And I know for a fact, I've had issues with like pipelines. If you have like a main pipeline and then sub pipelines behind it. And so if there's a dependency in one pipeline versus another, you have to start with the pipelines that have no dependency, deploy them first, and then reverse deploy them up because you need the GUID of the pipeline to be referenced in the parent pipeline and keep going back up. So I want to start from the Git experience, create a new branch, and I want to have everything created in the order that I want them. I want everything rewired together correctly. You know, my lake houses should be created, and then my notebooks should attach to them correctly, and all the GUID should match. Oh, and by the way, I already know I need data in there. So what do we do with the data piece?
Let's not forget that piece,
Do I want to virtualize the data through a shortcut? So let's just make some automatic shortcuts so I can just build and test. But maybe I actually need real data there as well. So maybe I need an option to say, well, I don't want to virtualize the data. I actually want real data. So here's what I need to do. Here's a pipeline or something, a discipline to say, build this, run this pipe. So do all this stuff, run this pipeline, go get the data from the development server, copy the last 3 months of data, put it in my lakehouse, and then, okay, you're done, ding. Like I want it to be like a microwave. I want to put my branch in the microwave. I want to set my timer and say, go. And I want it to ding me when it's done. And I have everything ready to go. And I show up to Fabric and we're ready to build, right? So that's the experience that I want. And we don't have that.
No. What Mike's trying to say is the well runneth deep.
The well runneth deep.
It runs deep. So, and what I like to, it's already been an hour. I kind of want to see what then is, if we know, listen, this continues. The knowledge, the experience, what you need to know can expand on what we want, what we need to know. So what is the MVT here? The minimal viable tooling that we need to know if I'm getting started, if I want to jump in, because Mike, like you said, this can expand on really what we would love to have, like in terms of from the dependencies, from some automation. But there's also, I think, here the basics that people can survive on. So if I'm in a Fabric environment, and to say just purely in the Fabric playground, what's the MVT or MVP, so to speak, on what should I know from branching strategies? What should I know from tooling that's going to allow me to survive and thrive with Fabric and using CI/CD? And Matthias, I will hand it over to you here.
Maybe he didn't hear your question.
Oh no!
We might have lost audio.
Mike, I'll hand it over to you. So here. So
restate your question. Let me hear it again.
Yeah. What's the MVP here when it comes to what do I need to know? The minimal viable tooling on what should someone know if they're going to play in the Fabric playground?
Okay. So let's talk about, like, step one, baby steps into like full grown steps at this point, right?
Yeah.
So, my experience has been, there is a synchronization that can happen between the Microsoft UI and Fabric and the workspaces. So when you have a workspace branch, you can synchronize it. And then there's this idea of like a deployment pipeline that goes like dev, test, prod. So talking about the environment thing separately. I think the easiest place to get started with this Git integration, or even CI/CD in general, is let's just talk about backups. Like, we're just generally going to talk about, we need to have a backup of our workspace. And because this is, to me, this is an unblocker for organizations, right? So the unblocker is, I have semantic models, I have data somewhere, right? Or a workspace that has code in it. And all I really needed to be able to do is I need to be able to make changes in the service, make changes locally, make changes with publishing a PBIX file. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where the change is made. I get a copy of whatever that change is. So to me, early on in Power BI, I would very strongly suggest do not edit or create anything in the service, because I could not download it again and get a copy of it, right? If something went terribly wrong, again, Microsoft was really good about not breaking things, but I was very adamant about not letting anyone touch that stuff. So, okay, fine. But on top of that, I said, okay, now that we have this new Git integration, just by turning on the synchronization, I can easily get in and out of that workspace. I can easily make changes that I need to. So I think my step one is really around being able just to get into the workspace and be able to add them in and out with that synchronization piece. Because then I can use deployment pipelines to go from dev to prod through the environments, and then I can just start easy. So that's my starting point. Then there's another realm of this, is when you start really getting into Git, and this is where I think Matthias's tools are going to come into play here. And I've seen some of them, so I've seen this experience. Matthias has built some stuff in Navidata where you go to GitHub, you create the branch, and everything's built for you, right? You have automation that goes beginning and there's actions. Okay, branch is created. Great. Now I'm going to kick off a series of actions. New branch, deploy these things, put them out there, load some data, do some tests, verify it works, right? Good. Check. Done. Now my developer within the UI of GitHub can then start cutting out branches, and then whatever is deployed, it's automatically deploying those things directly into your Fabric workspace. So I have a named branch or a named workspace that I can go use and attach myself to. So I really like.
No, and I'll kind of do a little parallel with you and kind of expand on what we talked about, where for me that MVP is understand the principles and get your environment set up right the first time. And when I say environment, honestly, man, I'm talking about GitHub Desktop or VS Code. Have the right application tooling available for you before you really get started. But I think, to me, it's the principles, right? Even if you just know the GitHub Flow of a dev and prod and you start working that way, that's going to at least to get you understanding the principles, the concepts, right? Where you can really get on your way. But you're not going to be successful, or it's going to be very hard to be, if you don't have a good, honestly, user interface to do so. I would not rely on just the Fabric service, because again, point of this is not just that you're working in some weird environment, is that I can see the changes occurring, whether I did it, someone else did it before it goes to prod. And you're only going to get that in a good tooling or a really good application, some interface IDE. So for me, those, along with what you said, I'm going to expand on that and say, make sure you get your workspace set up correctly the first time and get those core principles down. And then just do a test with dev and prod and just get familiar, get comfortable with doing commits, get comfortable with the ideas of, oh no, that change should have never happened. What can I do? Oh, I can revert a commit. I can go back to another commit. Just basic principles. It's almost like you're getting ready to run a marathon. So focus on running, get the right shoes, and then you can get a little better on the, like some more advanced features, but you're not going to get there unless you get comfortable with the basics.
Yeah, and I'll quickly call out here, like the Microsoft documentation for the CI/CD workflow options in Fabric. I don't really like any of those options. I don't think those options are. I think they're all just half thought through. They're okay. They kind of work, but I don't really love it because there's potentially a lot of heavy DevOps automation in there that I don't really love initially. And again, let me be clear. I don't want to write a lot of PowerShell. I don't want to write a lot of Python scripts and notebooks and stuff. I don't want to do that. I want the tool to just know what to do and just make it happen. What I want the easy ability of saying, this is my main branch. Here's where I should attach it. I can release things with tags inside that branch so I can then push things to production when I want to. I can have testers that are able to see code and versions that release candidates for production items. Yeah. And then I need my developers to be able to build environments as needed with minimal friction. And especially I need the data to be there.
A wider audience too. If I want to make this available.
None of Microsoft's documentation talks anything about automation and how to auto load the data directly into these environments. It's just not there. So 100%. I'm confused around some of that part as well. I'm going to just quickly mute you, Matthias, just because I'm getting audio back from your computer. Raise your hand if you need to say something. So no problem. So with that, let's just do a quick thing of final thoughts here. I know we're over time. This topic should probably be held on again. We just barely started talking on some of the CI/CD pieces as well here. So all this to say, check out the articles. There's a lot of details and documentation there as well. I'm going to push towards that and make sure that you have the ability to go read the documentation, go figure out this stuff for yourself. We will probably talk about this in future episodes and bring in experts still to talk about more of this on the podcast. My final thought is just start somewhere, right? Yeah. Really talk about how many environments you think you need. Think about, I loved your comments here, Matthias, around what team functions do you have, developers, stakeholders, testers, people using things in production, and figure out what is your cadence for release code. I think if you answer those questions first, it will really help you align on some sort of process and build the process independently of the tooling. And then you can kind of step back and work on that. So let me kick it over here to Matthias. What's your final thoughts here as well? And I'll unmute.
Can you hear me?
We got you.
Gotcha. Fantastic. I'm so sorry. I just completely lost audio for the last 10 minutes or so.
No worries.
So I couldn't hear what you've been saying either. If I may, if people are interested, in a week's time, I'm going to be doing a user group presentation on Fabric and Power BI branching strategies, 1 hour, but very demo heavy, when we've mentioned different branching strategies here. I'm actually going to show what they look and feel like and practice and talk through that a little bit. It's the Power BI user group Turkey, and it's I think 5 p.m. GMT on Thursday, the 3rd of July. So there we go.
Awesome.
That's coming. Other than that, someone said in the chat earlier, this needs at least 2 hours. Couldn't be more true. So yeah, it feels like we only sort of scratched the surface a little bit, but hopefully people found it thought-provoking and at least have some pointers now in terms of taking this further.
Awesome. And with that, I also found the link. I found the link to the meetup event on for you, Matthias. I think you said it was on coming up here pretty soon. I'm going to try and put this link in the chat window here. July 3rd, Thursday, 17 p.m. BST is the time zone there. So I'll put that link in here. That way, everyone, if you want to join, check it out on Meetup. Go join the group. Let's go overwhelm them with a lot of people. And I think you definitely want to hear what Matthias is going to be talking about over there as well. Tommy, any final thoughts for you?
Absolutely. I just want to say thanks, Matthias, for having us. The last 4 episodes have been wonderful. And again, I think for a lot of people, if you're starting this journey, it was intimidating for me. It was very intimidating, but just get comfortable with the basics. Just download VS Code, create a repository, or clone one. It's so easy to get started. There's really not a lot of barriers to entry. So I would just recommend you see something you like on GitHub, download, start it. Like, oh, what can you do with this? And just understand that. Work on a development environment of Fabric and just see what's in it. There's a ton here. And again, we unpacked a lot, and we showed how many boxes you can unpack here. That being said, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know all things. There are some crucial things you need to know. And I would say get started there. And honestly, this is
Get started.
Get started. I didn't even think of that. That's pretty good. So get started, get her done. But honestly, I would say just really, truly begin your journey here. This is the future. And I think for a lot of people, whether you're working enterprise or mid-size in Fabric, this is going to be the default way that I think people are going to prefer to work in.
Oh yeah.
So,
I'm already preferring it. Like, regardless, you should not be standing up a Fabric workspace that is of any importance to your organization without attaching to Git. Period.
Yeah.
It should be there. Yeah. Whether or not it becomes elaborate in deployment and all these other kind of extra things that are on top of it.
Yeah.
Somewhere you need to start thinking that way now.
From a career point of view, get yourself ahead. Enough puns. But all right, that's all I got.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate your time today. Thank you for listening to us and hanging with us a little over an hour today on the podcast. We really appreciate your listenership. We had a lot of people jumping in today, so that was awesome. Very happy about that as well. So at the end of the day here, all of this is just fun, and also hopefully you learned something as well. Please, if you found this educational, if you found some ideas or concepts here that you felt were relevant to your workflow day to day, please go in and share this on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, something like that. Whatever your social media is, we'd love a share if you don't mind. The way we can voice this great knowledge that we're giving out here for free. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. And share with a friend, since we do this for free. Do you have a question, idea, or topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Well, head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all powerbi.tips social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.